Well, hello everyone. I'm Rebecca and I'm a technical consultant at Leyton. So just to give you a bit of a background around me, I'm a mechanical engineer, and in my current role at Leyton, I use data on a daily basis to help companies get money to carry out research and development. So data is really important to us. What I wanted to talk to you about today is how you can present data, and hopefully this will help with your project. So first of all, I thought it was worth starting with what is data? And essentially it's everywhere. It's facts and numbers that can be collected together for analysis. And there are several types of data that you might want to use in your project. So there's what we call qualitative data. So that's non-numerical data. So we're talking about words that can be used to describe things. And then there's also quantitative data. So we're talking about numerical, so numbers. And just to give you an example of how you can use these different types of data, I've picked my favorite thing in the world, chocolate. I've got my chocolate bar. And so for my qualitative data, I could say that it's a milk chocolate bar, that it's fair trade, and that it's got purple packaging. So those are all examples of qualitative data. On the quantitative side, I could say that it's 200 grams, that it's got 1,068 calories, and that it's 20 centimeters long. So those are all numerical examples of data. But the big question is, why do we use data? Well, firstly, it's really helpful for painting a picture. So like with that chocolate bar example, if I told you I just had a chocolate bar, you might think of several different types of chocolate. However, if I tell you that I've got a chocolate in a purple package and that it's milk chocolate and it's fair trade, you might start thinking, hang on a minute, that's dairy milk. So it helps paint that picture. But it can also be used to help tell a story, make an argument, and share information. So generally it's really, really important, and you will all be using it on a daily basis, whether you realize it or not. Now, actually, in terms of what it means in the real world, it's a whole subject in itself. So it's referred to as data science, and you have data scientists whose job it is to work with data. But the thing is, it always starts off with the why. So all data scientists always start with asking the question of, what am I trying to understand, or what am I trying to show? And once they've got that question answered, they can then go off and collect their data. So this is where you're going to reliable sources, so things like websites, government data sources, and collecting the information. And it's really important that you do make sure that you're using a reliable data source. There's enough trouble in the world with fake news that having reliable data is really, really important. Then need to prepare your data. So you do something that's called data cleaning, and it's basically just getting your data all organized so you can use it. And then we can carry out analysis. So that's the part where we start to look at, well, what is this data telling us and what can we learn? And from that, we can produce a data model and then use that to produce a dashboard or some way of visualizing the data. And that's really important because that's what your user is going to use to understand what you're trying to tell them. And that's what we're going to talk a bit about today. So on to presenting your data. Well, I first of all wanted to start off with infographics, because as part of your project, you're having to produce a poster with lots of facts and information. So here I've got an infographic on infographics, just some interesting facts that I wanted to pull out for you. So firstly, apparently people who use visual aids in presentations or posters are up to 43% more effective at getting their message across and convincing an audience to do something. So think about your climate change project. If you're trying to influence how people live their lives and get them to make improvements to reduce their impact on the planet, actually using images and visual aids like graphs and charts in your poster might be really helpful. Something else, that 90% of the information transmitted to the brain is visual. And look just here, they've got the fact, the 90%, but they've also got a picture of the brain. So you instantly think of the brain. It really helps illustrate what you're trying to say. Another point is that 79% of users scan any new page they see, which just emphasizes the importance of making sure that your messages are clear and that you really highlight the bits of your poster that you want your user to see, just in case they're not going to read it word by word. So it's about making your message nice and clear. And then also an interesting point is that text is retained in the short-term memory, but actually images are stored in the longer-term memory. So if you want your message to stick and have a long-lasting impact, use images to help with your poster. So that's just a bit on infographics, but I wanted to go into some of the graphs and charts that you could use to help analyze the data. So, oh, I've forgotten a point. Very important point is it's important to state where your sources come from. So whereas talking about using reliable data, it really helps if your users can quite easily see where you've got your data from, so they know that they can trust it. So on to presenting data. So say if I'm trying to demonstrate the impact of climate change and global warming, what I could do is take an example and say that I want to understand how average temperatures have increased in the UK over previous years. Now, what I can do is I can go onto the Met Office government website and download a load of data. Now, this is a really big data set and it's not really telling me a lot in its current format. So I'm going to think about a few ways that I could best present this data. So first of all, I could use a bar chart, which some of you will have seen in school. So here I've plotted the average temperatures against the months of the year between the years of 2015 and 2020, noting that the data for 2020 only goes up to February. Now, in terms of how to really make sure that I've presented this clearly and make the most of my data, it's always important that I label my chart with a title. So important for the audience to be able to understand, what is this chart or graph actually showing them? Another thing, really important to label your axes so that the user can understand what you're showing. And where you are using things like temperature and it's got a unit, so degrees Celsius, always add the unit to the axes. And another aspect for this chart is because I've got multiple years that I've plotted, I've got a legend and I've used different colours to show which of these different bars refers to which year. So it makes it a lot clearer to see which years I'm referring to. But in terms of interpreting this graph, I think it's always useful once you've prepared your data to think about, well, what is this actually telling me? Does this support my argument? So first of all, from this graph bar chart, we can see that the hottest month is July on average, which makes sense, middle of summer. But we can also see that 2018 on average had the hottest summer. And if we're trying to look for general trends in the data, now this is still a relatively small data set, just looking across 4 to 5 years, but we can look at the average increase. And on average, we can see that summer months are getting warmer. So there's a gradient increase as the years go on, recognizing that there are natural fluctuations. So we have to look at the data as a big picture. So what if I now just want to focus in on the temperatures for the month of July? So I could use a table for this example. Now, tables are better when you've got a much smaller data set. Obviously, if you have a massive table, so you've got a massive number of data points, it's going to take the audience ages to read through it. And so it makes more sense for larger data sets to use a graph or a chart. So here I've just added into my table the years and the average temperatures. But I don't think that looks very good, does it? So I think I can make it a bit better. So what I've done here is I've remembered to add in units for the temperature. So always make sure you have units to help your audience understand how you're measuring a certain parameter. And quite simply, I've just centered the numbers in the middle of the box, in the middle of the cells. So it just makes it tidier, neater, easier to read. It's always important to present data in a logical order. So as you can see for the year, I've presented it 2015 to 2019 going down vertically, which helps the audience just read what I'm trying to say. I've included all the temperature values to the same number of decimal places. Again, just means that it's nice and neat. And I've labeled the table so the audience can see what it's actually showing. Now, say if I just want to focus in on an average temperature variation in 1 year, so pick 2019 as an example, I could plot this in a line graph. So this is where I've plotted the average temperatures for each month, and then I've just joined up my points with a line to produce a line graph. Now, again, it's just a case of making sure that you've got a title to explain what you're showing, making sure the axes are labeled, and making sure that the scale on the y-axis, so the vertical axis, is proportionate to the line. So obviously you don't want to draw up a massive graph and then only be using the bottom of it to show the line, because it'd be much harder for the reader to actually see what the values are. So make sure that you scale your axes appropriately. Now I've got the data for 2019. What if I want to see what's happened in the 4-year period since 2015? Quite simply, I can just add an additional line on using a different color and using a legend to show which line refers to which year. And from this, I can get some information from it. So if I look at the 2 different years, as you can see in the summer months, say between June and September, the blue line is quite a bit above the orange line. So we can see that on average in this 4-year period, the summer months have increased in temperature. Now, you might want to do this over a larger gap so you can actually see a bigger difference, but this is just an example of how you might do a cross comparison. Now, one last thing before we go to questions, just wanted to talk about pie charts. So these are really good when you want to show a percentage of something. So for this example, I've just picked an example of looking at CO2 emissions for different UK sectors. So how much are different UK industries contributing to overall CO2 emissions? So what I've done is I've gone and collected my data and put it into a table. And I've then used Excel to plot my pie chart. So as you can see, for each of those sectors, it's showing their relative contribution to the overall CO2 carbon dioxide emissions. And from this one, you can see quite clearly that the transportation sector is the biggest contributor to CO2 emissions. So say if I was using this for my project to try and figure out what things I might be able to change to reduce my impact on the climate, one thing I might do is say, well, we really need to reduce transportation CO2 emissions. So how about we walk to school instead of drive? And if you think if everyone in the country walked to school instead of driving, then you could massively reduce the overall emissions. So it's ways of looking for where are the opportunities to reduce our impact on the climate. So that's all from me today. Just wanted to put a few points for you to remember when you go about your project. So first of all, always start off with a why. So what story are you trying to tell and what arguments are you trying to make? Secondly, remember those tips and tricks on how to present your data, and remember the importance of images. It's really, really crucial. And thirdly, always check once you've compiled your data, what's it telling me? What does it all mean? It's really important that that message is clear for your audience. So that's all from me in terms of a presentation. Good luck, Stat Warriors, for your competition, and over to questions.
Thank you so much, Rebecca, for sharing that with us today and sharing your kind of tips and tricks, like you said then on the last slide, about data. Really enjoyed listening to that there. Like you said then, we'll go on to some question and answer now. So for those that are watching, please post either your questions into the Q&A section on Zoom, or those that are watching on Facebook, please put it in the comment section. We've got one through on Facebook already, Rebecca. So the first one is, what made you kind of want to go into the field of kind of going into the data industry? Is it something you always enjoyed?
Yeah, so I think when I was at school, I always enjoyed science, and science to me was really the application of data. So quite interestingly, I love science, didn't really like maths all too much, which some people might think, why someone got into engineering if they don't enjoy maths. Maths for me was a necessary evil. But the thing is, I think when you use data and when you use numbers with context, so in science, it's all about using the numbers in terms of maybe you're talking about physics or chemistry. In engineering, it's really using numbers with real life meaning. That's what I really enjoyed, and that's when maths started to be a bit more meaningful to me. And so it was really taking my love of science, and I guess that logical thinking that I enjoyed at school, and looking at what my career options were. So I studied mechanical engineering just because that was a practical application of physics and maths. And then that's led me into this job.
So the young stat warriors that are listening today have to use programs such as Excel in the project. Is this something important that you need during your career and working in the data industry?
Yeah, so I use Excel on a daily basis. So I think if you can learn to master Excel early on, it's really helpful. And I'm going to be honest, no matter what career you go into, so many jobs use Excel to collate information and to make graphs. And even just like with preparing these presentations, say you've got to do a pitch at work, a lot of the time you'll be using Excel to prepare that. So yeah, Excel is really, really valuable.
Do you have like a favorite part of your job, Rebecca?
Yes. So a good part of my job that I really enjoy, and I think it's a benefit of engineering generally as a discipline, is my current job. I work across lots of different industries. So one day I'll be speaking to someone who works in aerospace, so works for planes. Admittedly, not the best for the climate. And then the next day I'll be working with a material scientist, so producing new materials. And there is that variation that no day is ever the same, and although you're constantly collecting different sources of data and from different industries, I think the analytical skills and the skills that you develop as part of the role can be applied across all of them. So for me, the best bit is that variation, and getting to talk to lots of different companies.
Yes, very very varied. I think, isn't it, your job, and that's really fascinating. And what's fascinating about it. The next question we've got is, what type of graph or chart do you use the most, or maybe like using the most? And
Ooh.
I'll just add to that a little bit as well. Kind of, does it depend on what you're working on?
Yeah, so it definitely depends on the data. So like I presented in the presentation, it depends on how big is the data source. So say you've got 5 different items, I might just use a table to present them. I know it's not very exciting, and I prefer the more visual ways of displaying it. So I would say smaller data sets, go simple, go a table. Whereas if you've got a larger data set, or maybe it's a bit more complex and you want to show a change in behavior, I think showing a change in behavior, something like a line graph, where you can follow what's happening with the data, or a scatter graph if you want to plot lots of different points. Those can show you some really interesting trends and behaviors. Yeah, my answer would be it definitely depends in terms of what you're working on, and what you're trying to show. But I think definitely even just with the basic graphs that Excel have, you can create some pretty good supporting images for what you're trying to do.
Yeah, and with the project that we run, obviously it's all about climate change, or we've got the other STATWARS project, which is all about film and TV, but kind of focusing more on climate change today. Is this something that's always been important to you, and you've kind of been fighting for?
Yeah, I think generally, I mean, if you look at what's happening in the world, there's a lot going on, but I think something we can't ignore is what's happening to our planet. And if we want to kind of maintain things for future generations, I think it's really important that we act now. I've always been quite interested in the renewable sector. So something I love at Leyton is we work with a lot of companies that are developing new solutions in the renewable sector. So things like wind power, so those big offshore wind turbines, things to do with solar. So how can we get energy from renewable sources, which means that one, we're not depleting the Earth's resources, and actually we're not contributing to emissions. So obviously emissions affecting the ozone layer around the Earth, so therefore affecting the amount of heat that we're heating up the planet. So I really love working with the companies that are helping reduce our impact on the climate and doing really beneficial things for the global community.
You said you kind of worked with kind of renewable energy. Are there any kind of shocking statistics that you've come across within your work at all?
Oh gosh, you've really put me on the spot there for facts. My memory isn't the best in terms of facts, but I think if you look at things that surprise me, I guess, and things that I guess I've come across that I probably didn't think about until I started looking into it. So I've always quite enjoyed fashion and clothes and online shopping. But actually, if you look at the impact that what we call fast fashion is having on the environment, it's actually really detrimental. So things like producing synthetic fibers, that's things using like plastic, and actually looking at lots of people are buying quite cheap clothes, wearing them a few times and then binning them. That is having a massive impact in terms of the waste that's generated. So I would say, I don't have any like facts and figures off the top of my head, but I would say actually if you start to look at kind of how you live your life and things that are contributing and do some research, you can actually find there's some quite scary figures that make you maybe question how you go about your life.
Yeah, that's some really good points there that you made. That is things that you don't really think about, but in terms of that kind of fashion and things like that. So really, really something to think about for the participants, and maybe something that they can think of towards the project that they're going to be taking part in. Also, you sent us a video about kind of going through maybe the 3 changes that you would make
Yeah.
if you were in STATWARS as well. Maybe for those who didn't see the video, can you elaborate on any of the changes that you said in yours?
Yeah, sure. So one of them was around actually fashion and the clothes that I buy. So when I realized what a negative impact buying all these clothes would be having, I basically made a commitment to buy pre-loved clothes. And what I mean by this is things like hand-me-downs or going to a charity shop. So buying clothes that have already been made and worn by someone. So by me buying someone's clothes that they're throwing away, it means that I'm not contributing to the demand in terms of the clothes manufacturers making more clothes, which obviously that is a whole industry in itself. And I know it's not practical all the time to find exactly what you need, but that's been a small change that I've tried to make. Secondly, so I sold my car because, like I said in my presentation, transportation is a massive contributor to emissions. And with my job at Leyton, I can actually walk to work. So I decided, well, majority of what I would use my car for would be getting to work and back. Now that I can walk to work, I need to stop being lazy and walk. So I decided to sell my car. And it just means that I've cut down on my personal CO2 emissions. And then my third one was that I'm trying to reduce my meat intake. Now, the reason behind this, just to explain a bit of the context, there's a few different aspects to it. So firstly, things like cows produce a lot of methane when they pass wind, is the polite way of putting it, but they are actually a contributor to emissions. And actually it's more about the processing. So obviously there's the processing of the meat in terms of turning it into, say, a burger that requires energy. And then actually when you look at the transportation, so unless you were buying all local, a lot of the meat that you eat is probably produced either in different parts of the country or different countries. So there's definitely additional CO2 emissions that are produced as part of that, that I thought by reducing my meat intake, that's at least going, again, it's reducing demand and helping reduce my impact. Going to be honest, I'm not a total vegetarian yet, but I think even making a small difference, so I know some people do meat-free Mondays, we're trying to do about half a week vegetarian, just to really to halve our impact in terms of that. So those were my 3 things.
So you've already been kind of making the changes anyway, haven't you? You've not just said you will make them, you've already started.
Oh yeah, those are the ones, yeah, which is a good point. I was trying to think of what additional things I could do. So if anyone has any additional ideas from their projects, I would be quite interested in finding out what those are.
Fantastic. So just as we kind of wrap up with the questions here as well, last one I would like to ask you, you mentioned kind of going through school, you weren't kind of that into maths or anything like that. So do you think anyone can work in the data industry? I know you said it's so kind of vast and lots of different kind of roles in that.
Yeah, there are so many different roles that it's not just about kind of processing the data. Like I talked about the data visualization, there is, if you're quite arty and you like to think about how you can create things, there are roles in terms of data visualization and interpretation. I would say just don't be put off if you're not enjoying maths at school at the moment. Your point of view might change. Mine certainly did. So I would say it's definitely something to consider, and there are so many opportunities, which I know when you're at school you're not really thinking about what are you going to be doing in 10-15 years time, but I certainly think in terms of keeping your options open, working with data has so many different options and so many different jobs that it's a really good thing to keep in mind.
I just want to say a big thank you, Rebecca, for doing this for us today and taking time out of your day to do it. I hope you've enjoyed doing it and answering those questions.
It was great. Thank you. Yeah.
You're very welcome. And thank you for those who've been sending in those questions as well. And I hope you've been inspired to take on our STATWARS competition and use our resources at statwarscompetition.com. I've also put in a link to our survey for those participants to complete after the interview today. So again, thank you for everyone for joining us today. I think we'll end it there. So bye everyone. Bye, Rebecca.
Thank you. Bye.